So my theory is if that can integrate into the genome of a male that's already been born, now you have this developing stage of the nervous system. What epigenetic influence will that have on this male nervous system? I mean, we have, what is it, a 75% decline in testosterone since the 70s. We have more feminized men than ever before. Not only that, this gender dysphoria craze, you have grown men that think, I'm a woman. I mean, yes, I think there's social influences here. I think there's a lot of other factors that can play a role, but you literally have this, this confusion of males who think they're women. Now, I think that there is an influence in the social realm, but why is Big Pharma trying to gray those lines? It's almost deliberate. What are your thoughts?
Right. That sounds like a very plausible pathway to some of these cases of gender dysphoria, particularly in very young children, right? Like when you have like a 5, 6, 7-year-old, they go to their parents, they say, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, I want to be a girl, that could possibly be explained by inserting female DNA into this male child, right? That's very plausible,
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
All right, Nicholas, how are you, brother?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's good to see you. You've been in the Gap. You've been in the Foxhole. Now, how do you pronounce your last name?
Hulscher.
Hulscher. Okay.
Hulscher.
Yeah, good, man. Well, I applaud you for all the work you've been doing. You've been one of those that are standing in the gap. Just have a ton of respect for you and those guys that have the courage to do so. And just you've been putting on a ton of just golden nuggets here and a ton of great information. Obviously the times that we are in some exciting times, but I want to notice kind of what you've been up to here as of lately. And as we dive into this conversation, there is one thing that I really want to talk to you about and have the common theme in this conversation is the post that you published here on the study of the trillions of DNA found in the vaccine. So I want to kind of touch on that, but not right now. I just want to kind of get what's going on right now in your world and tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, we are currently at the McCullough Foundation working on over 6 scientific manuscripts looking at various different domains now that are currently highly relevant to the domain of public health. And I'll give probably the largest project we're currently working on is our comprehensive review of the determinants of autism. And so this paper is actually slated to be uploaded to a preprint server next week. It's actually the largest review paper looking at both non-vaccine and vaccine-related determinants of autism. So we literally identify everything that could be possibly contributing. And, I'll give you the conclusion is basically all of this stuff, including genetics, environmental factors, particularly regarding genetic siblings with autism. There's about a 20% chance you will be autistic if your sibling is autistic. So that's big. Older parents, right? So there's a higher risk of ASD there. In utero, pharmacological exposures. So that includes there's about 30 different drugs actually linked to neurodevelopmental disorders when taken by the pregnant mother. And then there's so many other things: heavy metal, air pollution, maternal immune activation. So the mother gets infected or vaccinated. So many different things tied into this. Gut-brain axis we identified. That plays a key role. When you have severe dysbiosis, particularly very young infants, that also correlates significantly with ASD like behaviors or neurodevelopmental disorders. So all of that combined, and we lay out this framework, but then we look at all of the studies, basically all of them we could find, that look at the vaccines.
Yes.
And it appears, based on all the evidence, first of all, we identified only 29 studies that found no association between vaccines and autism. But we found over 100 that indicated a possible association with vaccines and autism, spanning case reports of developmental regression, moving on to mechanistic evidence of when they inject some of these vaccine components, aluminum, thimerosal, into animals in a preclinical setting, it induces neuronal damage and neurodevelopmental disorders. And then we move on to the um, to the epidemiological studies. There's a bunch that find a positive association that nobody ever talks about. No, it's never on the media. But there's actually so many of them we found. We lay it all out. But the key thing is when you look at the null association studies that claim there's no association, they don't have a genuine unvaccinated control group, right? So that's a major, major flaw. We identified 12 studies that specifically have a unvaccinated control group. All 12 of them find that the unvaccinated were far healthier with far less rates of neurodevelopmental disorders, chronic disease, and autism spectrum disorder. So that's basically this study in a nutshell. That's really what we've been drilling out in the past few months here, and so that's expected to be released shortly.
So I think that is profound because here's the thing, as you know, as well as I do, they tell us that autism is genetic, right? And so the studies like this are debunking that bumper sticker slogan. I mean, the science is settled, the science is clear, vaccines don't cause autism, and autism is genetic. That is that's a lie. This study, things like this prove that there is an epigenetic causal factor here. There is an environmental factor. There's a toxicity factor here that's causing this. I mean, we have healthy children go in, they get a vaccine, and then bam, they develop autism. I mean, how many stories do you hear like that? How many parents are telling the story? I mean, I just had a lady in my office. She said that this was just yesterday. She said their son was healthy. He was talking. He was fine. He was saying mommy and daddy. He had a vast vocabulary. He went and got an MMR vaccine, and then bam, nonverbal. Now he just makes sounds. He's not making eye contact. And, the data is there. I mean, the studies that say, hey, there's no correlation, those studies have been tailored and doctored. Look at William Thompson, as you know, head researcher. He admitted that they're tailoring studies here, doctoring studies that show desired outcomes. But, in other words, you said there's a gut imbalance. Wakefield was right. Wakefield was right. But I want to know more about this study. Is this a retrospective study? What's the methodology of this study? How are you gathering these numbers and the data?
Yeah, so this is actually a comprehensive review paper. So, we're not coming up with original data necessarily in that where we are conducting literal studies on participants requiring IRB approval. We gather everything that's been published in the past 20, 30 years and then make our assessments and indicate how many studies show this, how many studies show this, and synthesize all of it into a basically conclusion of what's actually going on here. So that's what the type of study this is. But when we talk about the studies that find an association, like you mentioned, William Thompson and Wakefield, yeah, those are key instances, right? So the William Thompson instance, that's huge. We reference that in the paper. We reference how they found that they omitted the increased risk of autism in Black boys after MMR. But there's also so many other ones that I honestly never heard about that we found that are quite shocking. I mean, we're talking about like 300, 400% increased risk of ASD after MMR. We're talking about large scale data sets. We include the Zervos paper that was recently talked about. There's been a documentary on it. we include Wakefield, like you said. Wakefield's actually an author on the paper as well, so he approves of it. So we've done so much now of this work. But here's the thing: the key thing is no study that we are aware of has actually incorporated all of the risk factors, right? So they can't really assess, which one's more significant or not, right? So the strengths of our type of study is that we see the whole picture, and thus we can better assess, how strong are vaccines as a risk factor, and we identified the strongest risk factor of them all, and it's quite obvious. All of it, you'll be able to read the paper very soon, and it'll be on a preprint server. And so hopefully, it'll be very difficult to publish, I would say. Any study that talks about vaccines as causing harm will be very difficult to publish, but it will be open access very shortly.
And this is the thing too. People say, "Well, where's your research?" They tell me all the time. I talk about how dangerous and harmful these vaccines can be and are. And I have thousands of studies. Just in the Miller's Review, I have just a book that he published years ago. There's 400 peer-reviewed articles in that book alone talking about the harms and dangers of vaccines. So the data is there. It's just that it doesn't make it to the masses because there's mass censorship. I mean, we're going against a $1 trillion industry, a cartel that has a stronghold on our healthcare system, a monopoly on sick care, and really what we're trying to do is protect healthcare. We are promoting. We want health. We want our children healthy. We want people to be healthy. And we're trying to expose this lie and expose this darkness for what it is. I mean, these are crimes against humanity. Just the Henry Ford, the documentary I watched here, the Inconvenient Truth, they talk about the data is there. Same with Paul Thomas. He submitted clinical data. Dr. Noonan, who was a physician in Pennsylvania, talked about how he treated the Amish, how he said there was no autism in the Amish community because it was an unvaccinated community. And there's your control group. And they said that they were healthier. I was never vaccinated. My children were never vaccinated. And people tell me all the time, how are your children so healthy? It's like, well, first off, they're like feral children. We let them run and they're out in the woods, they're playing, and none of that. We don't vaccinate. We don't live in this fear-mongering model that the world tells us to live in, that we have to vaccinate for everything. We don't live in this fear. I was taught that fear is the fire that fuels the furnace of disease. But again, there's this fear-mongering stigma around the whole concept and theory and foundation of vaccinations that uses coercion. First of all, it's evil and it should be against the law for any physician or clinician or pharmaceutical industry to force that fear, to coerce the people to get vaccinated. So again, we are doing literally God's work here. I believe this is a ministry to keep pushing the truth out there, to bring the truth to the forefront. So I pray that this information gets published. I pray that this information gets out there, Nicholas. And I think it's vital that people know the truth. Are you seeing the tides turning here?
I am seeing the tides turning. The data shows the tides are turning, particularly when we actually see, childhood vaccination rates, they're tanking across the country, right? People have lost trust. They've begun to realize just how experimental the childhood vaccine schedule really is, because they don't test them with real placebos. They don't test them long term. They don't know what happens when you inject 72 doses by age 18. That was never tested. And all these studies coming out showing massive increases in chronic disease. That Henry Ford study, 57% of vaccinated develop chronic disease by age 10. Only 17% of unvaccinated do. So it's so clear now. People are realizing that. And I think that all was a result of the mRNA debacle, which injured, killed, and disabled millions across the world. That made them realize that something's wrong here. And so even with the mRNA shots, a recent Rasmussen survey came out, found 56% of U.S. voters believe the COVID shots caused mass deaths. So it's beginning to become now a majority are aware of the true harms of vaccines.
Right. And I think that, I'm encouraged to hear you say that. I say that the soil for truth is rich right now. And I think that people are starving for this. But we are going to see, make no mistake, more fear mongering campaigns. You're already seeing that. Oh, there's a measles outbreak. I mean, I just had someone send me a message about chickenpox here, and they're terrified of chickenpox. I got chickenpox as a kid. And it's like it was a benign issue. It wasn't lethal, and I'm still here, never vaccinated. It's like we don't need to live in this fear model. But I think about this whole herd immunity mindset. I live in the woods again, and I have squirrels that are thriving. Okay, I have rabbits all over. In fact, they're almost a nuisance. They get into my garden. They're everywhere. I have coyotes. In fact, in this county that I'm in, you don't even need to permit to hunt them. You can just they consider them a nuisance because they hunt small animals, small game, and they're thriving. My point is these animals aren't vaccinated. How are they thriving? Right? How? And it's like, again, going back to the environment and epigenetics and these epigenetic models, it's like if you give the animal or the right environment or the body the right environment, it will thrive. But these children come into this world, they don't have a chance. We're vaccinating now in utero, and I think that's a design because they want these babies almost autistic out of the womb because they can hide the fact that there is an epigenetic causal factor here. So they push these flu vaccines or whatever vaccine in utero, and now they have vitamin K, hepatitis B in the first 12 to 18 hours of life. And it's like, people need to understand this. There needs to be informed consent, but they're not getting that. I want to talk to you because about the DNA factor, because this information needs to be talked about. Because to me, I think if people really knew that there were fragments of DNA, not only that, have you ever seen the Stanley Plotkin deposition?
I have not.
So I encourage you to watch that. But there's the Stanley Plotkin deposition. There was a couple that they were in a legal battle. They were divorced, and the mama bear didn't want to vaccinate the kids. And basically the dad was like, "Oh, she's crazy. I want to vaccinate." So the judge was kind of like, "Oh, I don't know." And so she brought in Stanley Plotkin, who's known as the godfather of vaccines. And he admitted that they're constantly using abortions for the production, development, and manufacturing of vaccines. And so we've been saying this, like, there are fragments here, not only of DNA, but also DNA of monkeys, or spaniel with the MDCK cell line, that's in these different vaccines. But I want to talk about what you found, or the study that you published here about the DNA, and what did it find?
Yes. So yeah, these vaccines, they're filled with all sorts of things that you do not want in circulation of a small developing infant, right? You don't want any of these compounds. So I mean, first of all, just starting with the ingredients in these and the trace residues, you have obviously aluminum salts, you have formaldehyde in many of these vaccines still left in the vials. It's on the ingredient list for many of these vaccines. You have neomycin, highly toxic antibiotic, and you have polysorbate 80, which is an organ toxic emulsifier. So, just that's already bad. But then this study, and it actually came out in 2015. I was completely unaware of it until when I posted it on Substack the other day. But what they did was they looked at the childhood vaccines that are developed using fetal cell lines, right? So it's basically, they take these fetal cells from like an aborted fetus lung, from like decades ago, and they kind of keep this cell line ongoing, and they use it to churn out these antigens for some of these vaccines. And so particularly they looked at the rubella vaccine. So this actually goes in, this is part of the MMR vaccine, right? So it's in the MMR vaccine. And then the second one was a hepatitis B vaccine. And so what they did was they looked in the vials and they found billions to trillions of human fetal DNA fragments in these vials, way above the FDA safety limits of 10 nanograms per clinical dose. It was way above that. And so you have all of these DNA fragments, but then they went even further and wanted to see, well, can these actually integrate into a genome of a human cell? And so they got these human cells, they exposed it to these DNA fragments, and the DNA fragments did indeed integrate into those genomes. In some cases, up to 0.6% of their entire genomes were from these human fetal DNA fragments. So that's just how bad that really is. And so if we have all, so that means we're injecting our children with some of these vaccines with some aborted fetus, somebody's other baby, and it's all just going to be now integrated into your baby and cause all sorts of issues. They even linked it to autism, in that it actually is in genes associated with autism. That's the areas where this fetal DNA was kind of inserting itself. So it's all very, very, very worrisome.
So this is very worrisome because it's in the genome. So I wonder what that would do to from like a genome expression, like a gene expression, like an epigenetic level, right? The expression of the gene. So how's that going to play a role? Do you know how that would influence? Any influence at all?
Yeah, so it appears it will, right? Because so you'll have literally not self, it'll be somebody else's DNA is going to be inserting itself into what the author said it would be inserting itself into these what's called double strand breaks where the DNA is kind of under repair, it's kind of fragmented a bit, and then the external genetic material can kind of fuse into those breaks. And so, if that happens, that can induce some mutations, insertional mutagenesis, it's called. And yeah, this can cause gene expression chaos, where all of a sudden you'll be expressing all sorts of genes in upregulated fashion or downregulated fashion that should not be doing that, and that will induce severe clinical outcomes or neurodevelopmental disorders, and so or immune dysfunction or even cancer, right? So it has so many implications. Nobody's really studied this aspect of it other than that group really, for about 10 years now. So this needs real further investigation.
So here's my thoughts, and I've been saying this since day one, right? We have cell lines like the Walvax 2 cell line that was, I think, in 2015 or 2017. They use a water bag abortion to create the cell line. We have WI38, the Windsor Institute 38 cell line, that comes from a 3-month-old female lung, right? So it's a gestational 3-month lung tissue from a female. Now, we have WI38 in a lot of vaccines like the chickenpox and other vaccines out there. My question is, the nervous system controls everything. It controls every cell, tissue, organ in the body. At a developing rate, the first 2 years of life, when most of these kids get most of their vaccines, the first 2 years of life, just so happens to be the most vulnerable and prominent developmental stage of the nervous system. It's called exuberant neurosynaptogenesis. Now, what happens when we inject this type of DNA, for instance, WI38, into a female? I'm sorry, WI38 is a female cell line. What happens when we put that DNA, those fragments, into a male developing nervous system? So my theory is if that can integrate into the genome of a male that's already been born, now you have this developing stage of the nervous system. What epigenetic influence will that have on this male nervous system? I mean, we have, what is it, a 75% decline in testosterone since the 70s. We have more feminized men than ever before. Not only that, this gender dysphoria craze. You have grown men that think, I'm a woman. I mean, yes, I think there's social influences here. I think there's a lot of other factors that can play a role, but you literally have this, this confusion of males who think they're women. Now, I think that there is an influence in the social realm, but why is Big Pharma trying to gray those lines? It's almost deliberate. What are your thoughts?
Right. That sounds like a very plausible pathway to some of these cases of gender dysphoria, particularly in very young children, right? Like when you have like a 5, 6, 7-year-old, they go to their parents, they say, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, I want to be a girl, that could possibly be explained by inserting female DNA into this male child, right? That's very plausible, that's got to be studied. That's actually a huge gap that nobody's looked at, but it's very, very, very plausible, particularly since it has increased. Transgenderism has propagated almost like a mind virus throughout the world in the past 20 or so years, and it continues to accelerate. And so yeah, that's a very plausible explanation for why we might see some of these increases.
Right. So my whole research in vaccinations is how the entry, the skin barrier, actually goes and causes a whole pathway process of allowing, the aluminum, the MSG, the formaldehyde, all these other ingredients, how they enter into the nervous system. I argued for many years that the blood-brain barrier is not developed, fully developed in a newborn. And besides the point, when we inject through the skin, we have an antibody response that's not what they're looking for. We have, an immunoglobulin E response, which triggers inflammation, which releases histamine, which opens the blood-brain barrier, allows it to be permeable, allowing for these things to enter the nervous system. But, we also have like MDCK cell lines, like the Medine-Darby K9 kidney cell line, right? Which is a kidney cell from a Cocker Spaniel. Dude, if people were at, all these it's funny, you have all these what do they call them? They're oh my goodness, they're like the the naturopath moms out there, but they still vaccinate. It's like if they were to read the ingredient list of these vaccines and they saw Medine-Darby K9 kidney cell, they would run from it. If that was on a ketchup bottle, there's no way in Fuhise that I would put that on my food. Nobody would, right? I mean, and then not only that, my theory for the genome integration, maybe these MDCK cell lines are entering the genome of these children. That's why, I literally had a patient come in, and she's like, I'm a cat. And her mom's like, I don't know what's going on into her, but she literally thinks she's a cat. So maybe there's a furry expression too from these cell lines.
Yeah, that again, that would explain that. But yeah, a lot of this does appear to stem from neuronal damage or brain damage. Unfortunately, it appears that, yeah, all these toxins do reach the central nervous system. It does overload and overwhelm the underdeveloped cytochrome P450 detoxification system in these young children. And so, since they already have these underdeveloped detox systems, and then you introduce these massive combinations and this massive bolus of toxins, of highly potent toxins, and all of this immune response, all of this combined is just going to literally shut down that detoxification pathway. All of this stuff is going to reach the neurological system, and then they're going to get severe neuroinflammation. They're going to get encephalitis, and then they're going to unfortunately incur brain damage. And so then they will all of a sudden want to be a furry, or they'll want to change their gender, or they won't be able to speak anymore, and they'll need potty training, or they'll need 24/7 daily care assistance. That's about 26% of all of these autism cases are profoundly autistic. Yeah, this is very, very this is a very bad thing.
So Nicholas, I know you've been in the fight here, and I know you are very knowledgeable too, just around the mRNA. I want to get your thoughts on the mRNA genome integration, because the mRNA is getting into the genome, right? So
Yes.
that's another thing. Have you heard of CRISPR-Cas9 technology?
Yes.
Now, what are your thoughts on that? I know we have a DARPA contract. It was DARPA and Pfizer. They had a contract back in 2012, 2013 about genome integration pharmaceuticals via vaccination. Do you think that this mRNA, is direct correlation to that contract? And do you think is this CRISPR-Cas9 technology?
It appears it very well could be. It appears it very well could be. Now the project I'm aware of from DARPA was Adept P3 back in 2012, where they stated their desire to make mRNA countermeasures against pandemic threats. So basically, what I'd say is, yeah, they've been working on this plan to introduce mRNA to the population for a long time, and it's very disturbing that it came from the military, basically. And so yeah, that wouldn't surprise me if it's if it's part of this CRISPR tech. But I do want to say that we did now verify the first instance or the first observed instance of genomic integration. And we just got it published after peer review. So it's online, everybody can go read it. And so what happened in this case was, well, first of all, the first author is Dr. John Catanzaro, right, of Neo7 Bioscience. They ran most of the genetic molecular testing, but so they brought in a 31-year-old who received 3 mRNA injections and had a stage 4 bladder cancer. So already that's an extremely rare cancer in that age group. You just don't see it. Stage 4, so it's turbo cancer. It developed quite quickly. And so we decided to do some multi-omic profiling, proteomics, transcriptomics, and see were there any integration events. Well, yes, there was. So we looked at the circulating tumor DNA of this individual, and there was a 20 base pair segment within the circulating tumor DNA in chromosome 19. So within chromosome 19, this 20 nucleotide segment of DNA matched perfectly, 20 base pair match with the Pfizer DNA plasmid reference sequence. So what appears to have happened here is a fragment of the DNA contamination in these mRNA shots inserted itself into chromosome 19 into a non-safe harbor region. So what that means is it didn't integrate in a benign area where you wouldn't see many consequences. It integrated into a transcriptionally active area outside of what's called the AAVS1 locus near the what's called zinc finger cluster. So it's not in a good area. So that's already bad. But then, so that's in there. It's what's called a host vector read. It's a chimeric read. So you go human, non-human Pfizer, human. So it's literally chimeric now. It's some sort of hybrid DNA, and so that's directly within that tumor, right? So that likely explains why that individual developed the stage 4 cancer, but also it was accompanied by severe transcriptomic dysregulation. So the gene expressions were going haywire, but the most concerning one was the genes related to DNA repair were literally being shut off, right? So the body it couldn't repair this damage. It just so all these cell lines with this integration, they would keep propagating out, becoming more and more and more corrupted, and then this cancer just spreads everywhere. So, in a nutshell, this is the first documented direct molecular evidence of genomic integration. So yes, we believe it can happen.
So it's kind of like, I always say what the seeds are to the farmer to bring a crop, these vaccines are to pharma to bring disease. Literally, they always say, they're healthy, they're safe and effective, but really it brings an array of different diseases. I mean, 1 out of 2 people are going to get cancer. There's a book I read. My dad actually had it. It was published in the 50s called The Poison Needle. And it talked about all of these physicians back in the day prior, to the polio vaccine, even it was around the smallpox vaccination. They had documentation of all these physicians coming together and saying, listen, this vaccine is causing cancer. Right? I've never heard of this or never, seen anything like this until, the rollout of this, mandatory vaccines and everything else on children. And so I think there is a long history here of how these vaccines do cause cancer. They're blood poisoning concoctions, for crying out loud. I mean, like you said, if you were to really look at the ingredient list here and really, if people were to see that, I think there would be a revolution overnight. I really do, especially with our healthcare systems. And I am thankful the tides are turning. But the unfortunate thing I am seeing is there's so many people still blinded by this. You can present all the information to them. In fact, we have the president talking about vaccines now, and then, Bobby Kennedy, and they're talking about this, how there's no double-blind placebo study. They're not held to the standard of science, but they still just ignore it. And this is where it is a religion. It is an ideology stronghold on the people. And where do you think that stems from?
Yes, it is. It's vaccine ideology, the largest false religion in the world. And it stems from the constant propaganda campaigns, psychological operation campaigns deployed against the population, since, the 50s, 60s, 70s, ramping up in the 80s, 90s. So people have just been bombarded by this propaganda that you need to get vaccinated. It's the only way. It'll make you healthy, over and over and over again. You keep seeing it on the TV. They see the ads. They see all this stuff. And so it's so entrenched generationally that you have to get vaccinated for the greater good. And they've become programmed, right? That's what happens. They are now in a vaccine cult. And if you speak against it, you become outcasted. Your friends will hate you. You'll be yelled at. People will freak out. They'll act irrationally. And so now that when we come to the mRNA shots, know that 80% of the world, or 80% of Americans, 70% of the world took at least one dose. It's very hard for the individuals that took a dose to come to terms with the fact that they have done severe damage to themselves and even to their family, their friends, people they recommended it to, particularly the doctors that handed it out like candy, right? They're not going to be able to come to terms very easily. They injected themselves, they injected their patients. So it's now a situation where they can't let go. They can't let go. They don't want to accept what they've done. And so they'll cling to the studies that claim there's no harm, everything's good, and they won't look at anything else that's happening. And so, yeah, it's a vaccine ideology is a religion, and it's very hard for some people to understand that it's a religion based on complete falsifications, fabrications, and lies.
So, we homeschool our children, and we have 5 children. The Lord blessed me with 5 kids. And, and I've had this debate with people. They would talk about how, there's sin into the world. And I don't know what your faith is like, and I don't know what your views are there, but, I'm a Christian, and I would get in these debates in the church that, they would say that, vaccines are a miracle, that God loves us, and it's proof that there's, He loves us, and that it's, and they would put these vaccines on a pedestal, and they would try to explain the sin correlation, that sin came in the world. And I'm like, just by that very definition, that's like an idol. You are putting this, it's like the golden calf. And, what did we learn during COVID? We had so many people like, do nothing. There's a savior coming of this vaccine. And they would, ridicule or persecute people that talk about ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. And it's like, oh, it's the vaccine. And, and it was, and just the whole meaning of the word corona is crown. It's like, I think there's meaning behind that. And spiritually, to me, it's like so much bigger on a spiritual lens. That's why it's such a, spiritual component in its spiritual warfare. But even going back to the 2019, I don't know if you remember in 2019, the vaccine summit, they took out in God we trust, and they put in vaccines we trust. Okay. So, if that doesn't send a check in your spirit, I don't know what will, right? I mean, and so this is a giant spiritual warfare. So I want to ask you, pandemic 2.0 is coming. I should say 3.0, because I think the Spanish flu was almost a copy and paste for COVID-19, or COVID-19 was a copy and paste for the Spanish flu, because if you remember, they had masks mandate. You weren't allowed to go into the business without a mask on. They had virtue signaling, wear a mask or go to jail. People were wearing signs like that. They had, businesses deemed essential, non-essential, social distancing laws. And then they had, this experimental influenza vaccine. And it's comical to me because they didn't have electron microscopy till 1931. And then how did they know anything about the Spanish flu in 1918? I digress. But, Bill Gates, you have Paul Offit, you have all these other tyrants in this field talk about, there's going to be another pandemic. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When we have another so-called, I call pandemic, what do you think we need to do to prepare for this? What do you think we need to be on high alert about? And, when it comes to especially the digital ID world, and when the government is leveraging all this to get vaccinated in order to function in society, I mean, what are I gave you a lot there, but kind of unwind that for me.
Yes, this is a very important thing that people all need to consider. and be prepared for 'em, because this criminal syndicate, this biopharmaceutical complex of manufacturing pathogens and at the same time developing their countermeasures and deploying that manufactured pathogen and mandating the countermeasure, that syndicate is still operating. And so, like you said, they are all on the news now. You turn on CNN. I turned it on the other day to see what they're talking about. In the span of 10 minutes, they mentioned the next pandemic about 10 times. And so that was when they were talking about the CDC. So they keep bringing up these threats. We see ousted FDA official. Everybody knows him now, Peter Marks. Right, he was fired by RFK because he didn't go along with, actually looking properly at vaccine safety data. So he was out, and then he went right on CNN and said how now all of a sudden there's going to be man-made threats that humanity's going to face, and now we won't be able to shield ourselves because Peter Marks is out. Right, so that's what he's claiming. You have somebody called Ashish Jha. He's the former White House COVID czar during the pandemic. He went to U of M, University of Michigan, a few months ago, and he claimed that we're entering an age of bioweapons and how there's individuals developing these, ready to release them across the world. You then have Bill Gates, obviously. He went on BBC last year claiming that the biggest threat now was bioterrorism, as he laughs. He laughs uncontrollably when he talks about it. And so you have all these people and all this messaging that, yes, they obviously have something planned. They have the vaccine passport constructs in place. That's why they say COVID was a trial run, right? They got everything in place, particularly in Europe. It's already, the apps are there, the mRNA factories are there, it's all there. So now all they have to do is release something else. There's over 1,000 BSL-3 and BSL-4 biolabs in the US alone. So there's thousands upon thousands globally doing gain of function research, making pathogens more transmissible and deadly to humans. These pathogens are sitting in freezers. And so all they have to do is just release something, and then they have the constructs. They'll give the code, whatever sort of manufactured code it is for whatever thing they release, to the mRNA factories, and they can produce these mRNA injections now very quickly. They won't test them in humans, and then they can roll them out. And then Gates, on the other hand, currently, he's already developed his foundation what's called microneedle patch implants for the next platform for inserting mRNA. So what this patch is so they'll be able to ship it to your house, right? And you can self administer these vaccines. You'll put it on your wrist. It'll dissolve. It'll install both mRNA and what's called quantum dots. And again, this is on the National Library of Medicine PubMed website. This is real. It inserts quantum dot nanospheres, which stay in the body for at least 5 years for use as a biological vaccine passport. So you will literally be marked, right? You will have a mark, and then you will need that mark to enter grocery stores, travel, gyms, stores, etc. And so this is all planned. This is all laid out. So it's very dangerous what these criminals are currently doing. And so all of this can be stopped, by the way, if we completely ban gain of function, eliminate these modified pathogens from these labs. They don't belong in existence, and stopping this mRNA madness. But unfortunately, it's looking like they're still planning something. So this has to be stopped.
Absolutely. Do not comply. I think we're going to be on a parallel universe. I can't help but think of Revelation 13:16 through 18. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So I think that, He who is wisdom, let him have understanding about the number of the beast. I think this is if funneling us into the beast system. I'm not saying that this is the mark of the beast, but it sure is funneling us into this beast system. I mean, we have a $500 billion AI surveillance system coming. Now we're talking about this vaccine passport. I'm telling you, as we all know, that COVID was a trial run to what's to come. I mean, this was the pandemic. You had the Event 201 prior 2 months of the pandemic being released here on the people, which was a giant military dress rehearsal for this whole thing, a simulated event. I encourage the listeners to go watch that on Rumble, type in Event 201 and watch that. I mean, this is definitely coming our way. I mean, the next pandemic, this is like Hegelian dialectic. The problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem, they get the people to react, and they come in and funnel what you said, the countermeasure or the solution. And I think that's coming our way. So we need to be on high alert, need to band together. We need to be wise, and we need to prepare here. So I'm going to give you the last word, Nicholas. How can people prepare for this? Give us a word of encouragement and give us some input on where people can find you.
Yes. So the first and foremost key thing is do not take any more experimental mRNA injections. That will, and do not comply with the passport system. So if they release a virus tomorrow or a modified fungus tomorrow, you can't comply with their BS, right? And so that would be the first step in preventing it. And obviously stock up on things that you can use for early treatment, right? Stock up on some helpful things that you can use in the case of something like that happening. And so, be prepared, make sure you got everything good. Don't comply. And it is indeed a spiritual war. I say that because they're trying to now replace God with this artificial intelligence, false God. And now they're developing these brain implants, right? Neuralink implants. They plan to be commercialized soon. And you will basically, it appears in 10, 20 years, almost need that to optimally function in the new society where they'll have this AI widespread. So it is becoming a very dangerous anti-human beast system that will be very hard to avoid to participate in society. So that's what's going on. So now positively, I think we can win, right? I think we can stop this. I think we can stop this BS. We can end this mRNA. We just have to keep speaking up. We can't give up, right? I know people are tired, right? People are tired of talking about COVID shots, right? It's been 4 years, 5 years, but we can't stop, because the moment we stop, we lose, right? So we got to keep going, and I think we can come out on top. We have the majority of the population now, so I'm looking forward to the future. I think we can have a positive outcome.
Amen. Where can people find you, Nicholas?
Yes, they can follow me on X at NIC Hulscher. And they can also follow me on thefocalpoints.com. That's the Substack with myself, Dr. Peter McCullough, and John Leake. We post there every day.
Nicholas, you bring a ton of wisdom to the table here. Thank you so much for your time. I just really appreciate you. We need to band together. The power is in the people. And if you're listening, please share this podcast, like this podcast, review this podcast. Share it with a friend, and do not comply. Your voice matters. There's a saying out there: we never know how far reaching something we may think, say, or do today will affect the lives of billions tomorrow. So be active, proactive. God calls us to be bold and courageous. The time is now. Awake, O sleeper. We need to fight the good fight. We are on the right side of history and the right side of truth. God bless you guys, and thanks for tuning in.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be, right, to be wearing gloves, a face shield, a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?